From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo. This is From the South. The social Minga leaders in Colombia will go on a national strike on April 25th. During a media conference, Indigenous, Campesino, and Afro-descendant representatives vowed to continue protests as they monitor the progress of the agreements reached with the government on Saturday. They also said the communities will go on a national strike joined by other sectors of society, such as students. The social Minga protest has run for almost a month, demanding that the government fulfill several agreements outlined in the 1991 Constitution. Our correspondent in Colombia, Tatiana Portela, has the details.
The National Indigenous Organization, UNIC, held a press conference in which Indigenous, Campesino, and Afro-descendant leaders talked about the accords they reached with the government. On Saturday night, the group came to a conclusion on issues related to their lands, health and education, among others. As part of the agreements, the communities unblocked the Pan-American Highway after the government promised that President Ivan Duque will visit the area. He's expected to fulfill that promise on Tuesday. In the upcoming meeting, the communities are expected to have discussions on the government's plan for the country and the role the communities will play in it. Indigenous, Campesino, and Afro-descendant communities said if the president does not keep his word, they will continue with the social Minga protests. They have also announced that they will take part in a national strike that will take place on April 25th. Labor unions, student associations, and other social movements will also join the national strike. The communities said they will strike in order to defend their rights and the peace accords they established with the FARC.
We thank Tatiana for that report. Libyans held a protest in the capital Tripoli against the advancement of troops loyal to military officer Khalifa Haftar. Citizens rallied on Monday in Tripoli's Martyrs Square. The protesters condemned Haftar and his so-called army, describing it as a group of war criminals bent on installing a military rule. This as an airstrike has forced the closure of Libya's only functioning airport. Some reports suggest that the attack at Tripoli's international airport was carried out by the Libyan National Army. At least 25 people have been killed so far, with 80 wounded as a result of fighting in the south of the capital. Meanwhile, head of Libya's Eastern Parliament, Aguila Saleh, said the battle in Tripoli was to expel the armed forces that have, quote, kidnapped the capital. Last week, the Libyan National Army, led by Khalifa Haftar, advanced west of Tripoli. Battles for the capital have been ongoing for days.
Therefore, in implementation of the constitutional declaration and the parliamentary decision to vacate the capital from the armed groups, and in accordance to the political agreement that states that these militias are kidnapping the capital, the Libyan National Army moved to the capital for one target, that is to expel these armed groups who have kidnapped the capital.
Still in Libya, the Russian foreign minister has blamed the NATO alliance for the current crisis. Sergei Lavrov said the bloc's 2011 campaign in Libya resulted in terrorism, illegal immigration, and other issues. Lavrov has since called for increased efforts by the UN Security Council to launch a peace dialogue between the Libyan rival parties.
We call on all Libyan parties to start a dialogue without preconditions. We are still in contact with the Libyan forces, with Major General Khalifa Haftar and with Prime Minister al-Sarraj, and we express our concern to the UN Security Council about this crisis and war against the Libyan army. And we call for an end to these clashes and parties to start negotiating.
Our correspondent in Syria, Hisham Wanous, brings us more details on the Libyan situation.
The Libyan Health Ministry has said at least 32 people have died, with dozens injured during a clash between the Libyan National Army also known as the LNA, and the military of the Government of National Accord. Troops loyal to the Government of National Accord began a military operation against the LNA, led by Khalifa Haftar, after he started airstrikes in Tripoli on Sunday. In an operation that began last Thursday, Haftar's troops said the airstrikes targeted armed groups and their military equipment in Tripoli. In response, the Government of National Accord said they started the Rage volcano operation to free several Libyan cities. It also commenced airstrikes against Haftar's military bases on Sunday. The UN mission in Libya demanded a ceasefire so civilians could be evacuated. However, those involved in the conflict ignored the appeals. The US has since condemned the clashes, saying it will relocate its troops. The UN Security Council failed to stop the escalation of violence in the area, since Russia rejected the resolution, saying it did not include all those involved in the conflict. The Arab League, along with regional countries, have called for a resolution to the conflict, but they have not had any luck yet.
We thank Hisham Wanous for that report. In Mexico, the president has once again said his government is willing to help mediate peaceful dialogue to resolve the political situation gripping Venezuela.
We have proposed that the parties sit down to talk, which is the best thing they can do. To seek a peaceful solution to the political situation, we want a peaceful solution of this dispute. That's the stance of our foreign policy, and we are willing to help for these talks to take place.
This announcement follows a request from the Venezuelan president on Saturday when he called on the leaders of Mexico, Uruguay, Bolivia, and the Caribbean to help create a table for peaceful dialogue in Venezuela. Maduro was referring to the Montevideo Mechanism, an initiative proposed by the leaders of those nations 2 months ago, but quickly rejected by the opposition.
I call on the Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, on the President of Uruguay, Tabaré Vázquez, on Bolivian President Evo Morales. I call on the Prime Ministers and Presidents of the 14 CARICOM countries to once again lead the initiative for peaceful dialogue which began in Montevideo 2 months ago. Venezuela asks for support to start a dialogue for peace and understanding between Venezuelans.
And the Venezuelan foreign minister also said the Montevideo Mechanism is the most sincere initiative to resolve the political situation in the country, calling for its reactivation. On social media, Jorge Arraza said that dialogue is the way to solve problems, not violence or war. Following a tour of Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, the Venezuelan foreign minister announced that all the countries he visited expressed their unwavering support for Venezuela.
In each of our visits, the countries gave us the full support and spoke to us about the need to reactivate the UN group created to defend not only Venezuela, but the United Nations Charter and all its principles, which seek to defend peace and international law. We need to act in every level of the UN, including the Security Council with the Secretary General and other bodies, because today the issue is Venezuela, as was Syria yesterday. So who is next?
Entrepreneurs from around the world are expressing interest in investing in Bolivia. This coming out of an annual investment meeting in the United Arab Emirates. Bolivia's President Evo Morales is taking part in those high-level talks. He tweeted that the country enjoys a growing and stable economy. In particular, Morales spoke about the strength of Bolivia's agriculture, mining, oil, and energy industries. During Morales' 3 terms in office, Bolivia's GDP has reportedly grown 5-fold as extreme poverty has been reduced from nearly 40% to just 15%. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. At least 10 soldiers in Brazil are to face trial after they opened fire on a family heading to a baby shower in a car, killing the 51-year-old father and prompting a protest. Musician Evaldo Rosa dos Santos died on the spot after he was shot 80 times. His wife, 7-year-old son, father-in-law, and a family friend who were also in the vehicle escaped injury. The military says the officers were responding to a nearby robbery in Rio de Janeiro on Sunday and mistook the car for the criminal's vehicle. Yet, one family member says soldiers unleashed the heavy barrage of shots without warning. The state of Rio de Janeiro has been occupied by the army since early 2018 under former President Michel Temer's tenure. And thousands in Brazil mobilized to demand freedom for former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva 1 year after he was jailed, barring him from running in last year's presidential elections. Our correspondent, Danai Galetti from Curitiba, brings us the details.
In various Brazilian cities and across the world, people have taken to the streets and organized gatherings to demand the release of former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Most of these took place on April 7th, which marked the one-year anniversary of Lula's imprisonment. More than 1,000 people gathered in front of the federal police station of the city of Curitiba, not only to demand his release, but also to oppose President Jair Bolsonaro's latest measures, which target the pension program of Brazil's working class. Therefore, leaders and members of the landless workers' movement are also present to discuss the current political situation, as well as the legal status of Lula. They also demand justice in the murder of Congresswoman Marielle Franco, an end to the pension reform, and support for the agrarian reform.
Brazil's social organizations and progressive movements held a massive demonstration in Curitiba on Sunday, April 7, to mark the one-year anniversary since former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was imprisoned, a fact that stopped him from running in last year's presidential elections. Despite the strong lead he held in all opinion polls, over 10,000 people rallied in front of the federal police headquarters where Lula is imprisoned to demand his freedom and reject the policies of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro.
He fought for the poor. He wanted people to study. He promoted the Maria da Penha law, the only law to protect women in our country. That law is not the basis for other laws in other countries. He comes from the same place as us. He's one of us. He can't stay in jail. He has to be here with his people.
Today marks 1 year since he was in prison, a leader who ruled for the poor, who ruled for the majority of workers. That is why he was persecuted and barred from running for office. If he would have been a candidate in the last elections, today we would not have a fascist president that rules for the rich, for bankers, and represses social movements.
Lula sent a letter to supporters in which he reminds them that there is no evidence proving his guilt, adding that, despite being separated from his family and friends and not allowed to give out any interviews, his voice won't remain in silence thanks to the millions who support him in Brazil and around the world.
Lula represents hope for the people. He was a president who promoted social inclusion, people's rights, and the integration of Latin American countries. The people who were against that, who did not want the people to have power, were against Lula. He was jailed so that he could not continue with these policies. He was put in jail so they could take away people's rights.
1 year after his unfair imprisonment, our duty is to set Lula free so he can lead our resistance. I think we are in a better moment than 1 year ago. The far-right government is losing popularity among workers, so I think we are ready to start a meaningful resistance to set Lula free and bring democracy back, not only to Brazil, but to all Latin America.
Demonstrations in support of Lula's freedom took place in several Brazilian cities and around the world. During the event in Curitiba, left-wing leaders said that only the people could reverse the injustice the former president is suffering, and congratulated members of the Lula Libre Vigil who have been protesting in a makeshift camp in front of the Curitiba prison since Lula was taken there 1 year ago.
The CARICOM Competition Commission, or CCC, is concerned about Scotiabank's impending exit from 9 Caribbean countries. Scotiabank is a Canadian financial institution that has been operating in the Caribbean for 130 years. Its assets are intended to be sold to the Trinidad-based Republic Bank in a $123 million deal. This has already led to the closure of 2 branches in Turks and Caicos in 2018. Last Monday, the CCC said it was concerned that Scotiabank's exit could have an anti-competitive effect in at least 3 member states. A small commercial plane has crash-landed at the Douglas Charles Airport in Dominica. The aircraft's nose gear reportedly failed, causing the plane to drag before coming to a complete stop on the runway. 5 passengers and 1 crew member were on board, but there were no immediate reports of serious injuries. The Ministry of Health in Barbados is preparing a document to take to Cabinet, which will provide free health care to CARICOM nationals who reside in the country. This was revealed by the Health and Wellness Minister. He made the announcement as he delivered the feature address at the opening of the World Health Day activity organized by the Pan American Health Organization. The theme of World Health Day was Universal Health, Everyone, Everywhere. Jeffrey Bostic said this was consistent with the policy goals of the Barbados government, which prioritizes providing universal access to high-quality health care.
Outlining this to take to Parliament.
So that we will have a policy in relation to the treatment or providing the provision of health care for all CARICOM residents, whether or not they are skilled nationals who reside in Barbados, because we believe strongly that a threat to public health does not only come from those who call themselves Barbadians, but from all those who live, work, reside, and even pass through here on cruise ships.
Authorities from the Caribbean islands of Anguilla and Montserrat have launched a fishing project focusing on climate change. The goal is to improve the sustainability of fisheries and conserve the marine environment. The fisheries sector in both islands is particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, including the intensity of storms and the rise in sea level.
Due to rising surface temperatures, we now have to go a little further,
Right now, Angola is in a dilemma.
During a surprise raid in the West Bank early on Monday, Israeli forces arrested the brother of Palestinian resistance icon Ahed Tamimi.
التزم حق الصمت يا حبيبي يما الله يرضى عليك رضا قلبي ورضا ربي يا حبيبي.
In the video posted online, the Tamimi family is seen encircled by Israeli soldiers as they drag 15-year-old Basim Tamimi outside. Ahed Tamimi and his father can be seen saying goodbye to Basim, as it's still not clear on what charges the boy was arrested. And this comes as Israel is set to go to the polls on Tuesday, April 9th for legislative elections. The vote can be seen as a referendum on support for long-serving Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu's Likud party appears to be trailing the Blue and White party, led by former Army Chief Benny Gantz. However, a poll published on Friday indicated that the far-right nationalist bloc, including Likud, is leading the race for the Knesset. And just prior to the polls opening, Prime Minister Netanyahu has pledged to annex Jewish settlements in the West Bank. The move could be construed as a cynical appeal to right-wing nationalist voters.
So his declaration is not just in the heat of electoral or electioneering campaigns. It is a statement of determination and policy. He is going to annex the settlements, all of the settlements. He's going to maintain his control over the Jordan Valley and annex it. And he's going to place the Palestinians in what he calls population centers, but under Israeli security. And he's going to maintain his illegal annexation of Jerusalem. This is the end of any chances of peace.
The South African government has downgraded the level of its embassy in Tel Aviv, Israel, which will now hold a liaison office status. This was an act of solidarity with the Palestinian people. Our correspondent in South Africa, Matuba Malachi, explains.
The South African government has implemented what International Relations Minister Lindiwe Sisulu calls stage 1 of a process of downgrading relations with Israel. That stage 1 started with withdrawing its ambassador from Tel Aviv permanently. It happened last week, and the minister says it's possible that Israel may end up without an ambassador here in South Africa. The South African Communist Party, meanwhile, has congratulated the government for its move, saying it was long overdue. The governing party, the ANC, agreed at its 2017 conference to downgrade its relations with Israel. The implementation of this resolution started after Israeli security forces shot Palestinian protesters on the Israel-Gaza border in 2018. That's when Pretoria immediately recalled South Africa's ambassador to Israel, Sisa Ngombane, for consultation. But we know now that it's for good and he's never going back. The Israeli government, through its embassy here in South Africa, says it won't comment on what has happened. And civil society organizations like BDSSA have welcomed this move. South Africa has a politically active Jewish community, and this will certainly create debate in the country, especially now ahead of the much anticipated elections in May. It's back to you, studio.
We'll take a short break now. Don't go away. Welcome back. Foreign nationals have been ordered to leave mining sites within 48 hours in Nigeria's northwestern Zamfara state. The government has blamed foreign nationals for an upsurge in insecurity and kidnappings in the area, and has warned mining operators who defy the order they could have their licenses revoked. Sudanese protesters have urged the military to back calls for President Omar al-Bashir to resign. Demonstrators have been chanting, "When the army is here, we have no fear." The army has not intervened since the start of protests in December. Protesters have camped out around the army headquarters in Khartoum since Saturday. Meanwhile, President Omar al-Bashir has held a meeting with the country's Defense and Security Council. During the meeting, al-Bashir stressed the importance of maintaining national unity, peace, and finding a consensus to the challenges the country is facing. U.S. President Donald Trump has designated the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. This decision marks the first time that the U.S. has formally labeled another country's military as a terrorist group. In response to the provocation, Iran's Supreme Security Council has put the United States military on its own list of terrorist groups. A Brunei national who identifies himself as a gay man has spoken out against the new measures implemented in the country that punish homosexuality. The new Islamic Sharia also punishes adultery. The penalty for both crimes is to be stoned to death. The Sharia has caused international outrage with a boycott campaign against hotels owned by Brunei. The LGBTQ community is pleading for help.
What's worse, act like we are non-existent to the world, or act like we are not, or hurt us even more, or condemn us for being who we are, because we are not something that in their religion are acceptable.
Students in Barcelona have taken to the streets to demand action against climate change, as experts warn that the issue is turning into a major emergency. More in this report.
Students of all ages took to the streets of Barcelona, Spain, to protest against climate change and to demand immediate actions to change its course. Their fight brings hope to many.
I have been told that by the time I'm 30, the planet as we know it won't exist anymore, and that our extinction is expected to happen by 2100. I will be 89 years old. The rat there won't be pretty. They are telling me that I have no future, and that is forcing me to take action.
These students are joining the Fridays for Future movement, launched by young Swedish activist Greta Thunberg. The movement has expanded all across the world.
We can reduce our environmental footprint by not buying so many plastic bottles, by not using cars and instead using a bike or walking, by using public transport.
One day after these protests, 50 environmental experts concluded that climate change is a social emergency. During a 12-hour session, each expert exposed their arguments.
Temperature has risen by 1 degree already, and we are not doing anything. Each degree has a huge impact.
We need to react before this situation becomes irreversible. We have to maintain the current temperature. This is forcing us to take action.
Experts have said that industrialized countries need to reduce their carbon emissions and that they start helping other countries in this fight.
Reducing carbon emissions has been a trend that was introduced during the past few years, especially in regards to emerging countries, such as those belonging to the BRICS bloc, among them China and Brazil.
Experts say we need to rethink our economic system and avoid models that are only benefiting a few by abusing our limited resources.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.